Hello and welcome to Phantom Fables TV. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Enough chit chat, let's get into today's story. A lot of people have reservations about Ouija boards. Some of it's religious, some of it's superstitious. To me, they were a little creepy, but I really wasn't scared of them. That was until I was 14 years old. I was an awkward teenager who was invited to his first boys and girls birthday party. The girl's name was Samantha. We all called her Sam for short. Her birthday was in the middle of October, just prior to Halloween. Sam was the kind of girl who wore and sported anything the nightmare before Christmas. I wouldn't quite say gothic, but maybe a little dark. As expected, her birthday theme was Halloween. My parents were fairly religious, almost the pearl-clutching type. Fortunately, Samantha's parents were able to talk to my parents and comfort them, that we would not be left alone with a large group of girls and that we would be supervised. My mother and father both agreed and told me they would pick me up around 11. The day of the party came. Luckily, my mother was not around to make it awkward. I got myself dressed and made sure that I had deodorant on. I arrived at the house where I met Samantha's parents. They seemed like very normal people, the very kind people. She grabbed me by the hand and led me into the front living room where her mother and father sat on the couch watching the news. She introduced me to them with her chipper and outgoing voice. They both had a warm smile on their face and shook my hand. I don't know why, but for some reason, whenever I met her parents, I didn't feel intimidated or afraid, like I might have been to meet another girl's parents. They welcomed me into their home and told me I was welcome to anything in the food cabinets or anything I needed at all. I told them thank you, and Sam grabbed me by the hand, leading me to the attic stairwell. "Everyone's up here," she exclaimed. I climbed up the staircase into the attic. She opened a doorway, and inside was a largely open, old, musty attic. There were tables and chairs with games, snacks, candy, food, cake everywhere. The corners of the room were littered with jack-o'-lanterns, skeletons, and miscellaneous other scary things. Sam had a large collection of costume makeup in the middle of the table. It looked like I was the only guy here. Samantha's other friends hadn't made it yet, so I was the only guy. Total opposite of a real sausage fest. The cool thing about Sam was that she was friends with all kinds of kids, not just the ones who were into scary Halloween goth stuff. She was friends with the cheerleaders, the nerds. She was friends with everyone. Everyone liked Sam, and that was pretty rare in our school, as it was full of cliques. Sam grabbed me by the hand and pulled me over to the table where the costume makeup laid. She sat me in a chair and asked what I would like to be. Her face was extremely close to mine. I was nervous, and as I attempted to speak, my voice cracked as I exclaimed, "A zombie?" Her eyes locked on mine. She cracked a small smile. She grabbed her makeup and began rubbing it on my face. She paused for a minute, admired her work, looked down at my mouth, and told me to open it. I hesitated for a minute before I did, and she plopped in some fake fangs you might find from a cereal box. A couple more of Sam's friends showed up, and it turned out I was the only guy that was invited, or cared to show up. For hours and hours we ate junk food, watched TV, played with the costume makeup. Sam's parents came back upstairs again with the lit birthday cake, singing happy birthday to Sam. We all sat down and had some cake, and Sam opened some of her presents before her parents retreated back to the living room, telling us to stay out of trouble and have fun. After a few minutes, I was able to flag Sam down and give her the birthday present that I had specifically picked for her. I had hunted all over the mall to find one of these things, and my mother almost didn't allow me to even buy it. I was able to finally convince her to let me purchase it. under the circumstance that we didn't use it and it was intended to be a joke. And of course, the present I'm talking about is a Ouija board. I handed Sam the box that I had tried so hard to wrap neatly and perfectly with a bow on top. She opened it immediately and her face lit up with an expression of joy. She wrapped her arms around me and hugged me tight. She told me that she loved it and had always wanted one. Admittedly, she said that she was slightly scared of them, but she would love to give it a try as long as she was with her friends. The background noise seemed to come to a halt whenever Sam opened her present. Everyone in the room was now staring at the Ouija board. She was holding it in her hands. It wasn't one of those cheap board game type material Ouija boards. It was a hardwood Ouija board that was polished and clean with a solid wood and glass planchette. A couple of Sam's friends seemed excited. The other two seemed terrified. Sam cleared away some plates and leftover food on the table and put the board down. "Who wants to give it a try with us?" she exclaimed. All the girls in the room seemed to cower away, except for her friends, Cindy and Ellen. They gladly stepped up to the table and sat down. The other two friends decided it was time for them to go. I didn't know if it was because they had been there so long or if they were afraid of a stupid Ouija board. Sam opened the instructions and was sure to read them because apparently there are a few simple rules of the Ouija board that you must follow, or you could possibly leave some kind of portal to hell open for the spirits to just come through. The rules on the small piece of paper inside the box stated that the room should be dark with a few lit candles. You should always say hello and goodbye to every spirit so you don't anger them. And that if you were a believer, to know the Lord's Prayer. We each put one finger on the planchette and began moving it across the board in a figure 8 type pattern before letting it rest in the middle of the board. Sam asked, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The planchette slowly crept to the upper left side of the board to the word "yes." I think Sam and I knew that we weren't moving the planchette, but Cindy and Ellen were not convinced. They laughed sarcastically and asked which one of us was moving it. Sam and I looked at each other and we shook our heads. Ellen's face went pale. Cindy was still skeptical, and understandably so. I was as well. The planchette then on its own began spelling out S-A-M, 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 very aggressively, very forcefully. And this time, I think Cindy understood that we were not touching the planchette. Cindy and Ellen yanked their hands away, leaving only mine and Sam's hand left on the planchette. Over and over again it spelled out her name. We quickly yanked the planchette to the bottom of the board and told the spirit goodbye. We couldn't help but notice as we moved the planchette, there seemed to be a lot of force, almost fighting back against us, like it didn't want us to say goodbye. But finally the resistance stopped and it rested comfortably on the word goodbye. Sam and I were freaked out. Cindy and Ellen were having a borderline panic attack. At this point, Sam looked at me with her voice trembling. "Please tell me that was you. Please tell me you were messing with me." I looked into her eyes and said, "No, Sam, that was not me." We tried to change the mood so we didn't ruin the night. "What if we try to contact your grandma, Sam?" I asked. With the slightest bit of interest, she looked at me and replied, "Yeah, we can do that." Cindy and Ellen had completely removed themselves from the Ouija board and were sitting in the corner, just watching. We moved the planchette in a weak figure 8 motion as Sam's voice lit up the room. "Eleanor, it's me, your great-granddaughter. Are you here? Can you hear us?" A long moment of silence pierced the room. The planchette started to move very slowly, almost as if whatever was moving it was old, feeble, and weak. The sight glass on the planchette slowly crept up towards the words, "Yes." Sam's face lit up. She looked relieved. She almost looked unbothered by what had just happened before. Tears formed in the corners of Sam's eyes. "Are you in heaven with Jesus?" she asked. There's a long pause. The planchette didn't move. Then, with a brutal force, the planchette was forcefully pushed to the top right corner, with the sight glass showing the words, "No." And then the planchette was yanked back down to the alphabet and began to spell out S-A-M, S-A-M, S-A-M. We went to let go of the planchette and it flew off the table. Ellen and Cindy were now screaming. Sam and I were trembling. The candle suddenly got blown out, and the room went completely dark. We began to scream, and the door leading downstairs slowly opened, and a shadowy figure filled the room. I woke up to the bright white lights, filling an almost stale room. My mother was to my left. My father was to my right. I panicked. I was confused. My mother calmed me. She told me that we had gotten food poisoning from some of the food at the party. We began to hallucinate, and Sam's parents found us and called our parents, and they took us to the hospital. I looked up at my mother and asked her, "Where's Sam?" "She's down the hall," my mother told me. A huge wave of relief hit me. "What about Cindy and Ellen?" I asked. "They're doing just fine. Their parents picked them up and brought them home." I looked down to find myself wearing a hospital gown, but instead of nothing underneath, I did have on a set of basketball shorts. "I want to see her," I told my mom. My mom shook her head, told me that I needed to rest. My dad peered over at her and shook his head. "Yes." My mom reluctantly agreed. The nurse came in and disconnected me from all the cables and monitors and lowered the bed rail. I went into Sam's room to find her sitting there pale, nauseous, and throwing up. She was able to stop for a brief moment to look up and see me. Sam's mother hugged me and told me she was so sorry. She didn't know what gave us food poisoning, and she's glad that we're okay. I hugged Sam's mother back and told her it was okay. I asked her if Sam was going to be all right. "Of course," she said. "She's got food poisoning, just like you did. She's just going to be sick to her stomach for a few days. Other than that, she will be fine." I was generally a pretty shy kid, but I felt it was appropriate. I leaned down over Sam's bed and wrapped my arm around her and hugged her. I told her that I had fun at the birthday party, even though we both ended up at the hospital. She let out a slight, feeble chuckle and smiled. "Thanks for coming." Both of her parents smiled and told my parents, "You've got yourself a good kid there. He's welcome around our Sam any time." My dad patted me on the back and directed me back to my hospital bed. After a few minutes, the nurse appeared with a lot of paperwork in her hand. "Good news, kiddo," she exclaimed. "You're going to get to go home." My parents seemed to brighten up and be happy. She handed my parents paperwork and discharge instructions for care for food poisoning. They disconnected me and pulled out my IV. She wrapped my arm where the IV was and lowered the bed rail once again to tell me that I was free. Dad said he was going to pull the car around. Mom said she would stay with me while Dad got the car. I walked into Sam's room to ask if she got to go home too. "I don't know," she said with a weak, raspy voice. "But I promise I will text you and let you know," she said. A smile on her pale, miserable face slowly went away. "Okay," I said, with a weak smile. My mother grabbed me by the arm and directed me out into the front lobby, and then outside where Dad was waiting with the car. I got in and buckled myself up. It was raining. It was cold. It was depressing. I arrived home where I fixed myself on the couch. I fell asleep watching TV. My mother woke me up around 9 o'clock that night to tell me to get in my bed. I climbed into my bed. I had no recollection of time, but I remember being awoken again by the phone ringing. I heard my mother shuffle into the kitchen to answer the phone, and with a loud, panicked, incomprehensible voice, I heard her hang up the phone. I heard footsteps creeping slowly towards the door of my room. My mother opened my door, peered down at me, and almost paused, almost as if she was trying to figure out what to say to me. I pretended to be asleep, but curiosity got the best of me. I sat up in bed. My mother sat on the bed next to me. She wrapped her arms around me. She told me, "I'm so sorry. Sam just died." "What?" I exclaimed. "How? How is this possible?" Tears quickly filled my eyes. It didn't feel real. My mom, who was also crying at this point, said they don't know exactly, but her food poisoning got so bad she began to vomit blood profusely, and she lost too much blood before she passed away. I glanced over at my alarm clock to see 3 a.m. I buried my face into my hands and began to sob uncontrollably for what seemed to be forever. I was finally able to fall asleep. I woke the next morning at 6:45 a.m. It was still cold, dark, and depressing. Sam was still dead. I was hoping I was going to wake up this morning and find out it was all just a bad joke or a nightmare. But it wasn't. I had no idea how I was going to deal with the loss of such a special person who was so young and so near and dear to me, but a moment of clarity broke through those things. With the Ouija board, actually, did that happen? Or did we hallucinate it all? A few days later, we buried one of my best friends, one of the best people I ever knew. A lot of people from school were there, but none of them knew Sam like Cindy, Ellen, and myself. I stood directly between Cindy and Ellen, not admitting a single word, just standing there in silence, looking down on our friend who was about to be buried. The service ended when I caught Cindy and Ellen walking back to their mom's car. Cindy's mom saw me and decided to give us a moment, and told Cindy and Ellen to take their time and she would wait in the car. Each of the girls hugged me. They looked at me. They told me, "You know, Sam really liked you." "I liked her too," I managed to get out. "Hey, listen, I wanted to know what you guys remembered from that night." The girls looked at each other, kind of shrugged, and said, "Well, we got food poisoning, hallucinated, and then woke up at our parents' house. What do you remember?" they asked nervously. I told them about the Ouija board and all the events that took place. That really happened?" they asked in a panicked voice. "We thought it was just all a hallucination," and told me that the planchette spelled out SAM, SAM over and over again, confirming my story. I told them that I don't think it was a hallucination from food poisoning. I think something got us from the other side of that Ouija board. Either way, we had the exact same hallucination, or something got all of us from that Ouija board.